Well, good evening, everyone. How you doing? I'm Lee Love, and I am your host for Photo Mentor TV. We do this every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, and glad you could join us either live or on replay. Always nice to have you guys join us and ask your questions. And the purpose of this show is to get your questions answered on all things photography related. Primarily, new photographers is who we help, and because I think they need the most resources out there. There's very few people that are helping new photographers, in my opinion. I call these the undeveloped photographer. I think we're all undeveloped photographers at some point in our career, and there's always something new to learn. And so that's the purpose of Photo Mentor TV. Anyway, tonight we've got a couple interesting things going on. We're going to do a segment on education in the photography industry, and also I'm going to talk a little bit about what I referred to as left brain, right brain photography. And one of the things that seems to bother me is I think that a lot of people that I see on Facebook and other groups are promoting the wrong aspects of photography for new photographers to start with. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. We are also going to do some fun stuff. We're going to do some trivia. I've got 10 trivia questions I've come up with. Some of them are hard, some of them are easy. So a little bit of something for everybody, but I think it'll be fun. And I encourage you guys to join in and test your wits there and see test your photography knowledge on both the industry and also all things photography related. So anyway, also I should let you know that just in case you are not aware, we do the first Friday of the month. We do photo reviews. They are anonymous reviews. Encourage you to submit your work. Anybody can do this. It's again, doesn't matter what camera you have or experience. You can have a D3500 or a Hasselblad or even a smartphone. It's not about the camera. It's about encouraging you and giving you some professional feedback on your work and helping encourage you. So again, the images are not whether I like them or not. It's not a thumbs up kind of a like situation. It's really more of a looking at them from a more objective level, from composition, technical, and the story. If you are interested in submitting your work, I'd love to have you do that. Just go to review.photomentor.tv. And I think we want to know how long you've been shooting. Kind of helps give me an idea of the on your work, on how to grade it. And that's pretty much it. Upload your photos. We'd love to have you join us there. Also, again, if you're on social media, you can follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter as well. So anyway, always love to have you there. It's a great way to keep up on what we're doing. Okay, let's get right into it tonight. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about photography, teaching methods, and where I think, my perspective on some of this stuff. And you may agree or disagree. That's okay. It's nothing wrong with that. I think we've lost the ability to agree to disagree, by the way. But, maybe if you are an open mind and free thinker, you might actually learn something here, and I might change your mind or give you a different perspective, if nothing else. So let's look at what's going on here. The first thing is, if you look at I'll start with a quote from Leo Tolstoy, and if you don't know that, he wrote War and Peace, and he has an interesting quote. It says, "The activity of art is based on the capacity of people to infect others with their own emotions and to be infected by emotions of others. Strong emotions, weak emotions, important emotions, or irrelevant emotions, good emotions or bad emotions. If they contaminate the reader, the spectator, or the listener, it attains the function of art." So, well, what does that mean? What's he trying to say there? Let me put it in my perspective and where it applies, I believe, to photography. One of the difficulties I see in the photo industry with especially new photographers is everyone wants to tell you about what camera to buy or lens to buy or the ISO you should be shooting at, or you have to shoot on manual, or you have to learn the exposure triangle. And they're trying to really throw a lot of information at you, technically information. They're like, oh, just go to YouTube and you can pick it up there. Well, not everyone can go to YouTube and pick it up there. And frankly, I don't know that YouTube's the best avenue for that. Now, we have a YouTube channel. All the videos we're doing here are on YouTube, but I'm not sure that's the best place to learn everything there is to learn about photography. And the reason is some people learn differently. There is something referred to as right brain, left brain thinking. And I know you guys have heard this before, but basically the left side of the hemisphere of the brain is really designed for analytical thought. It's very logical. People that can speak multiple languages are typically in this range. People that pick up math easily, planning, rules, reasoning. This is all function of the left hemisphere of the brain. Now, the creative aspect, music, emotion, composition, those things are all come out of the right side of the hemisphere. Now, don't get me wrong, you have to have both of these, okay? You can't be right brain or left brain only. They work in conjunction. So, for example, let's put this in photography context again. If you're going to go out and do a photo shoot, you have to have your left brain active to be able to figure out where you're going to go, make sure you pack everything, you have all your batteries charged, your checklist, that type of stuff. You wouldn't want to just run out of the house without your gear, right? Well, those are left brain functions, so you have to have that. But in the middle of your shoot, you kind of have to put that aside. I describe that as in my own way, as getting out of my own way, because I find sometimes I will concentrate on the technical and miss something creative right in front of my eyes. So you need both, all right? So there's a place for each, but when you get on the shoot, you have to kind of try and bring up or inspire or draw from that right hemisphere to be able to be the most creative and to tap into the feeling and the emotion and what's going on in front of you. It's not just technical. It's not just aperture, shutter speed, and those types of things. So one of the things I see a lot of people talking about is, again, I mentioned about learning the exposure triangle and this, that, and the other, and how that's important. And it is important, but it's not necessarily the first thing you need to learn, in my opinion. I think it could be later. It could be something you can learn down the road, but the cameras now are very sophisticated, and they can do a lot of the work for you. One of the quotes I really like is by Ansel Adams, and his quote is, "There's nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept." And the reason I bring this up, not only is I really like the quote, and it really puts kind of a crosses the T on the whole concept, but because I believe this is really where most people in these Facebook groups and forums and things, and most photography instructors that are talking about exposure triangle and shooting on manual are coming from. They're coming from a technical side, from a left hemisphere side. And you have to know this stuff first before you can actually learn to take a picture. And I say that's not true. Look at the work that's done from iPhones. There's amazing photography I've seen shot from iPhones. In fact, I've had a lot of my students tell me, well, Lee, why isn't my photos from my iPhone are better than my DSLR? And the answer is quite simple. The camera is doing a lot of the technical work, and all you're doing is focusing on the subject, on the art, on the emotion. And therefore, that helps you become a better photographer. No one hung a picture on the wall and said, "Oh, wow, look at that manual mode," or "I got that exposure triangle just perfectly." The image either moves them or doesn't. It goes back to the Tolstoy quote again, right? It's either emotional, there's some art there, or there's not. And we're going to get into this a little deeper. I'm going to dive into some of the ways you can do this. But that is my premise, is that it's not about that. Now, as someone who came from the film days, I think back in 1960, 1970, whatever, you had to know the exposure triangle. You were shooting completely on manual. The camera was manual, focus was manual. There wasn't there. You had a little arrow inside the viewfinder, and that was called the light meter, and that was all you really had to deal with. So if you didn't understand the exposure triangle, you didn't understand how aperture, ISO, and shutter speed related, then you'd end up with either a black fit picture on your film when it got processed, or a completely washed out picture, or an overexposed or underexposed picture. So it was really essential that you learn that. But we're not in those days right now. We're dealing with thousands and multi-$1,000 cameras that can have all this fantastic technology, eye focusing, and all this the dynamic range of being able to record both whites and blacks in the same image. All this fantastic technology. Why not use it? Now, don't get me wrong. Let me make sure you understand where I'm coming from on this, because I don't want people to misquote me. I am not saying you never have to shoot on manual. I'm not saying you should always shoot on auto. That is never what I said. What I'm saying is, if you are a new photographer and you're just learning, let the camera do some of the work for you. There is no reason you have to do all this stuff. Focus on learning to see first. That's more important. Okay, and again, that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here. Okay, so let's go back to this again. So let me kind of again put a fine point on this. If you look at this chart right here, which I will, okay. Again, this breaks down what role the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere plays in photography. So as I said before, the left side really, and when people tell you to shoot on manual, or that you have to learn the exposure triangle, they're really forcing you to use your left hemisphere. Now, that may be fine for some people, but I know some photographers that are just awesome, unbelievably creative. I'm envious, but they barely know an f-stop from a bus stop. It's all about the feeling. It's all about the art. You hand them a camera and the way they go, and they can see stuff that I can't see. And that is called art. So they are definitely working from the right side of the brain more so than the left side. Now, again, these things it's important to understand the craft, and you have to know, and there are times when you need to know these things, but they're not necessarily what you need to start with. Okay. The next thing is, whoops, sorry, wrong direction. So let's take a look break some of this down a little bit. This is what I'm showing you right here. These are the 7 most common elements in art. Okay, it's lines, shape, form, space, texture, value, and color. Now, I'm not going to go into each one of these tonight. We've covered them before, and I'll be covering them in more detail in future episodes. But these things are the language that we use to communicate visually, emotionally. Now, whether you like it or not, the human brain, the human experience responds to these things in a certain way. Color, for example, red versus blue versus green versus yellow, black versus white. They all have a subconscious meaning to the human psyche and to the human psychology. And so whether you like it or not, you should learn to use these tools to better communicate in your imagery. This is what's more important. But I don't see anybody teaching this. I don't see anybody in Facebook talking about this. It's all about, oh, what lens should I get? Or what lens, the settings should I shoot for this shoot or that shoot? That's not art. That's not going to teach you photography. Okay? The things I'm talking about here are what's going to teach you photography and make you a much better photographer. No one gets hired, if you're doing this for a living, gets hired for the camera you have. They get hired because you can think and see differently. You want to get to a point where they're hiring you for the way you see. It's like my friend Sue Ann, who's a writer. Sue Ann is an amazing writer. People hire her for her ability to write, for the way her perception on things, the way she's able to take and craft words together and make and take a meaning from something that maybe the company or the person would see one way. There, she's able to take that and turn it into a whole nother prose, into a different meaning and a more effective meaning. Well, that's what she gets hired to do. She doesn't get hired because she has a great computer or a bigger monitor than somebody else, or she writes with this pencil or owns that notebook. She gets hired because of her expertise and her ability to turn a concept into words and to make those compelling. It's exactly the same thing in photography. Okay? So that's what we want. That's what I'm trying to get you to understand. So let's look at this again. All right. So again, left brain, right brain. The left brain, and there's a lot of people that are into this. I know a lot of them myself. They're technique and spout off every ISO and setting and all these features in this camera and that camera. But again, they're primarily, I don't know. They have a lot of gear, but I don't see them take many pictures. But it's the person that can deal with the items on the right that really makes a difference. All right. So let's look at a couple of these. So tonight we're only going to talk about one of the 7, and that's lines, because we could go all night, and it could take hours going through all 7 of these things. And like I said, look at some of the previous shows. I'll try and put links in the comments section to some of the other shows. But so let's look at lines for a second. Lines, again, are something that's interpreted primarily by the right hemisphere. And there's basically 3 to 5 kinds of lines that most people will run across. There's variations that you can mix and match, of course, but we'll just talk about a few of these. So you look at a vertical line, and a vertical line has a certain meaning. It conveys to the human brain, to the psychology, that of height and strength, because it's they're shooting upwards, and it's really more of a stability kind of a thing. And so if you look at this picture here, this kind of a building, very, very, the way it's designed, the vertical lines, very straight, very structured, I guess you could say. And so it has a unique meaning to it. People interpret that as a very strong building. And you can see this everywhere. I could show you hundreds of examples of different photos of vertical lines, and especially in the area of logos. If you look at the area of logos, you'll see this used a lot. People that do design understand this more than most. And as we go through some of these examples, you might actually recognize some characteristics of different logos that you've seen, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so the next one is diagonal lines. Now, diagonal lines are, any line that's not straight up and down or horizontal, and they suggest movement or lack of stability. Now, you'll see this quite often when you look, last week, I think it was, last week we did the photo reviews, and there was one image there of someone that was doing a panning shot with a vehicle, and the car was moving. And the whole car and the landscape and the road and the trees and everything were all using diagonal lines. And so, therefore, it gave you a sense of motion, all right, of movement. And that's exactly the way the human brain interprets diagonal lines. So you want to try and learn to interpret these when you see them in real life, or even if you're creating an image. You want to be able to understand, should I be incorporating these lines? Should I bring line? One example, for example, is repeating myself here. One example is where you see lines like a road coming together, okay? And that's those are diagonal lines, and those are not drawing, but they are bringing the viewer's attention to a particular subject. And that's a very common technique that can be used. And there's a reason for that. Again, because it gives the human brain the sense of distance, and it also gives them the sense of, again, a directionality of movement. All right. So anyway. All right. So diagonal lines are another one that you want to be able to incorporate into your photography, and look for those. Just go out and shoot lines. There's nothing that has to be doesn't have to be a subject. This is just an exercise. Just see how many lines you can find and whether you can do all of these, all the ones I'm showing you here. Okay, and again, the diagonal line is again showing a sense of movement or a lack of stability. And you can see this in artwork, you can see this in graphics, you can see this in logos, as I mentioned before. A bunch of horizontal lines tend to convey movement to the human brain. Okay, the next one is the curve line. Now, curve line, we've all seen these before, of course. These are lines that bend and change direction gradually, and they typically will give us a feeling. Again, it's subconscious. You may even be aware of it, but they convey a sense of comfort and ease. You'll see nice smooth lines, for example, and a lot of people that are designing logos will use curve lines to be able to convey something softer, more approachable kind of design. And so curve lines are something that is something you should try and incorporate in your own photography and see how you feel about those. See how they communicate to the viewer and what their reaction is. And then the last one is zigzag lines. Now, this is the one that it's a series of disjointed or diagonal lines jointed at the ends, of course. And they're really, they convey excitement or restless or anxiety. So, for example, when I look at this little graph of all these little pictures, to me, I think immediately of a cartoon character, of just all, the bubble they put above the cartoon character's head, or something like, the POW or in a comic book, or comic strip. They'll use those lines to convey action or anxiety or some kind of disruption going on. And that's exactly what I see when I think about these lines, these zigzag lines going all over the place. And again, if you look at something like this, here you've got wires going everywhere, and while in some ways they may come across as organized and orderly, they will also generally come across as disorganized and restless. I mean, we've all seen a pile of wires behind our computer, right? Go on the floor and everywhere. At least I have quite a few of them over here. And it's always kind of looks like a mess and a jumbled mess and very disorganized, even though they may be labeled and I know where everything goes, it still presents that as a difficulty. So, okay. So I guess my point of all of this is I'm trying to get you to think that, are we really teaching our fellow photographers the right way? Are we really teaching them photography? Are we teaching them technology? I believe a lot of times we're really teaching them technology, not photography, because photography has nothing or very little to do with manual mode or aperture or f-stops or inverse square law or lighting ratios or light meters or histograms. I mean, those are all elements. They're all pieces you need to know. But the analogy I would use is you don't need to teach, if you're trying to teach a young person how to drive a car, nowadays you wouldn't force them to learn how to drive a manual transmission just to be able to drive a car, would you? It would be silly. Number one, if you can even find a car that has a manual transmission, and I guess nowadays automatics even have a manual mode, but it would be silly to force them to learn to drive in manual stick before they could drive automatic, not just because that's all that's available, but because it really serves no purpose. You're driving, the thing you're trying to teach people in driving is the rules of the road. when to merge, when not to merge, speed limits, things like that, technique, driving, braking. Okay, those are not necessarily right brain functions. I agree; they're typically more left brain, but at some point they become right brain functions, don't they? They become automatic. You don't think about them. I mean, you're on your phone, you're on playing with the radio, whatever, all at the same time while, I don't know, drinking a cup of coffee, having a cigarette, and putting on your eye makeup, maybe. I don't know. And, but the point is that we do these things automatically with a whole bunch of things going on, and it doesn't seem to bother us because they become automatic. They become more right brain functions, not left brain functions. And it's the same thing with teaching someone photography. You could make an argument, I guess, to say that, well, once you learn all these right brain function or left brain functions, then it will be automatic to do. And that may be true, but your work is still not art. Your work is still technical. Okay? You could be perfectly exposed picture, but so what? It's going to look like crap. Okay? No one responds to a perfectly exposed picture. They respond to a perfectly emotional picture. They respond to an image that has movement, that has some curiosity about it, that tells a story. That's what people are drawn to. Okay? And that's all happens as a result, again, of these things here on the right brain: the lines, the shape, the form, the space, the texture, the value, the color. That's what people respond to, not the functions on the left side. They don't care about that. I often, and we'll move on here in a minute, but I often hear people say, "Oh, I did this photo shoot and I did it on manual. I'm so proud." Okay, the pictures look okay. I mean, they're nothing to write home about. They're mediocre photos, but just because you shot on manual doesn't make them better images. So here's an exercise for you. Take your camera, put it on auto. Take a photo. Look at the back of the camera. Get the EXIF data. Find out what the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO is. Go to manual. Dial in those exact same settings. Take exactly the same picture. What's the difference? None. They'll be exactly the same photo. So it doesn't matter what mode you're shooting on. That doesn't have anything to do with making a better image. It's the art behind. It's the act of seeing, telling a story, then learning how to expose the image, I think, and take more control, and then maybe post-processing. And we're going to talk more about that down in the future. So anyway, I think I've kind of covered that. If you have any questions, of course, you can feel free. You can always email me at help@photomentor.tv. And you can also, we'll put that in next week's show, or I'll respond to you directly. And also, it's a great way to bring up, if you have topics you want me to cover in future episodes, that's also a great way to contact me. Okay, I think that's about it as far as that part's concerned. Anybody up for having a little fun? Let's try a little fun here. I'm going to see if I can. Now, this is, I've never really done this before. I'm using some different software. We'll see if this works or not. Okay, so we're going to do a little photo trivia. We had some fun with this last week. Just on a whim, I tried it, and we got a lot of good response, and I'd love to have you guys interact on this one as well. And if you want to see me do more of these, let me know. I'm thinking about expanding this and really taking it to another level, make it a little more fun, maybe even have some prizes or something we can give away if to the winners over a period of time. Okay, so the first thing is we're going to do, so here's the way it'll work. I'll put up a question. You will have 30 seconds to answer your question. No Googling, by the way, no looking. If you don't know the answer, that's okay. So the answers are A, B, C, or D. All right. And thanks, James. I think you will. I think it'll be fun. James says he loves fun, and I know he does. He's also a great photographer, by the way. I'm going to tell you, James Torrenzano, we're going to do an interview with him coming up James did a amazing series, a very self-reflective series that I want you guys to hear about because I think it touches exactly what I'm talking about on the aspects of the art and not the technology part. So, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a question. You're going to have 30 seconds to answer the question. All you got to do is put a comment into the YouTube comments or the Facebook comments, and you don't have to type it out. Just put A, B, C, or D if you think you know the answer, and we'll just kind of have a little fun with this and see how it goes. Now, I don't have any clock music or countdown music, so I haven't gotten that far yet, so we'll have to work on that. But let's try this. See if we can do this here, if I can make this work. Okay, guys, ready? Here we go. All right, so the first one is, okay, 30 seconds. Who developed the first 35 millimeter film format? This was film as well as camera. So was it Nikon, Leica, Sony, or Fuji? Who do you think developed the very first Fujifilm? Who do you think developed the first 35 millimeter film format? So just put A, B, C, or D in your answer there, who you think it is. Okay, and time is up. Anyone have any guesses? No guesses. All right, you ready for the answer? And, okay, Allie says D, Fuji. That's a really good guess, Fuji, or Allie. I put that in there as kind of a ringer because Fuji, of course, film. Anybody else have any guesses? All right, and the answer is Leica. In 1925, I believe it was, Leica developed the very first 35 millimeter camera. It was called the Leica 1, Leica A1, or 1A, I think it is. And they developed the very first 35 millimeter film and the 35 millimeter film format. So, hello, Tamara. So, and glad to hear you guys, glad to see you guys in here. No, you can't say B now, James. Okay, all right, so here's the next one. You guys ready? Here's the second one. All right, and the next one is, how long did the shutter have to be open for I can't pronounce his name right now. Oh man, I've gone tongue-tied tonight. So this guy's developed the very first wet format, one of the very first formats. Daguerreotype. That's what I'm trying to say. It was A, 3 to 5 minutes, B, 10 minutes, C, 1 hour, D, 20 to 30 minutes. Now, this is not necessarily related to this format, but you guys can tell why now people stood so still and why they never smiled for photos. And the reason is because they had to sit still for a long period of time to be able to have their picture taken. It wasn't nowadays, you couldn't shoot at 8,000th of a second. So the processing took a very long time. Okay, Carl, good guess. Carl says, here, let's put some of these up. So Carl says, Carl says that he said B, which would be, whoops, let's try this. Helps if you put that up. Carl says B, and James says A, which is a a long time. And Tamara also says A. That's also a good answer. And the correct answer is, let me see, go back here to my quiz slide. Sorry, too many buttons to push here. Okay. And the correct answer is 20 to 30 minutes. Can you imagine sitting for 20 to 30 minutes or even doing a landscape? I mean, things move in 20 to 30 minutes. But so you have to figure that the ISO was like, what, 1? Very, very slow process to be able to do that. By the way, these are going to get much easier here in a minute. I just did a few hard ones up front, but they're going to get a lot easier. So don't get discourage you guys. So anyway, 20 to 30 minutes, and that was kind of considered a really big deal because it was less than an hour. All right, so here's the next one. And like I said, they're going to get easier. So the next one is, what does the word Kodak stand for? Was it A, named after a Kodiak bear, B, nothing, made up name, C, it was used some of George Eastman's son's names, letters, or D, a chemical process for film processing? Kodak, what do you think it was? A, B, C, or D? All right, and let's see, you guys have, I got to remember, there's a little bit of a delay here. Okay, and that would be the time is up. What do you guys think? A, B, C, or D? Okay, Carl says D. That's a good one. Sue Ann says, what's Sue Ann say? Sue Ann says B. Okay. Let's see here. And Carl said D. Okay, that's right. Carl said D. Sue Ann said A or B. And the answer is, okay, you guys ready for this one? The answer is, come on, bring this up. Okay, the answer is B, nothing. It was a made-up name. It's pretty interesting if you read the background behind it. He liked the letter K. Eastman liked the letter K, and so he just thought it had an interesting sound, and so he and his wife, I believe, made up the name Kodak. It doesn't stand for anything. And I always thought it would stand for like some kind of chemical or some kind of technical process, but it doesn't. So anyway, kind of interesting, huh? All right, so again, from here on out, I believe they start getting easier. I hope. Because I'm not intending to stump you guys. Just want to have a little bit of fun here. Okay, you ready? Here comes the next one. The next one is, in 1986, which company developed the first digital sensor? A, Leica, B, Sony, C, Kodak, D, IBM. You know, guys don't want to hear me sing, that's for sure. Okay, so what do you think? A, B, C, or D? Leica, Sony, Kodak, or IBM? 1986. Okay, so Carl says C, and Tamara says C. Anybody else want to take a guess? Again. Okay, and the answer, Tamara says, okay, so B. Oh, am I looking at the wrong question here? All right, so the answer is C, Kodak. 1986, Kodak developed the very first digital sensor. Isn't that amazing? It's a lesson to be learned where, I mean, these guys, and you know, if you ever want to go back and look at some history, and I know Carl knows this as well because he and I used to work together way back when in these days, but the people that invented Ethernet, okay, for all the networking that we use, that company was Xerox. Well, who would have thought it, number one, and nobody would. They developed so much technology and could never really leverage it, never really take advantage of it. And I think Kodak did the same thing. I actually remember I was involved in the Kodak launch of their photo CD technology, and they invited me out to go to California to the launch. And they were desperately, even though they had developed the digital technology and the digital sensor, they were still pushing film. And the reason was film was their bread and butter. That's how they made a living. And if they were to abandon film, they would have gone out of business, which they went out of business anyway. But the point is, they developed digital technology, sensors, and could never capitalize on it, which is really a shame. So the lesson there is companies that you think are always going to be around may not always be around, and the industry changes. I was lamenting I was thinking about the different technologies, the telecom industry, the phone industry, of course, even the coffee industry. I mean, right? Maxwell House and Folgers were considered, I mean, they were the kings, right, of coffee. And now Starbucks is the name you hear everywhere, not these other guys. So it's kind of interesting how the industry can change, which, and I don't mean to get too off track here, but let me just remind you that I hear a lot of people talk about photography. And I was discussing, we'll call it, with somebody on a Facebook group. And they're going, oh, well, the problem with photography is it's oversaturated and you can't make any money. Well, that's BS. It's not oversaturated. It's oversaturated if you're competing on price. It's oversaturated if you're not differentiating yourself from somebody else. It's oversaturated if you're just a button pusher. But it's not oversaturated if you're an artist. And that's the whole point of what I'm trying to do here tonight, and why I try and do with this show, is to get you guys to think outside the box and think outside of the camera and what people are telling you about what photography is, and make photography your own. It's an art. It's a brush, and what you do with it is completely up to you. So I disagree that there's certainly a lot of people in photography business. I'm not going to disagree with that. And a lot of people, everybody with a camera thinks they're a photographer, but that doesn't mean there's not room for somebody that's an artist and that can differentiate and see the world differently, because that's what people really want to hire when they hire a photographer. Anyway, I don't mean to get off on that soapbox. Okay, here, let's do the next one here. Got a couple more. All right. So this one what does the term dodging refer to in photography? A, brightening area during printing or editing. B, white balancing the light meter. C, darkening the area during printing or editing. Or D, lowering the ISO. What does the term dodging mean in reference to photography? All right. Come on, you guys. This one's a little bit of a trick question. Maybe it might be a little harder than but they're going to get a little easier, I promise. Okay. And 3, 2, 1. Okay, what's your answer? James says A. All right. All right. James says A is the answer. Anybody else got an answer for that one? For the put it back up there again. And Carl says A. All right. So we got 2 A's. All right. Tamara, you're in Canada, right? That would be an A. A. Okay. So the answer is A. Brightening area, printing, and editing. So in them olden days, what we used to do is when you're doing in a dark room, you were in an enlarger and you're shining the light through onto the negative, through the negative onto the paper. And what you would do is you would take a piece of paper, something like this maybe, and you'd cut a hole in it. You take usually a piece of scrap printing paper, and you'd cut a hole or some kind of shape in it. And you would move it like this, and you'd put it in between the light from the enlarger onto the, I'm sorry, this is totally backward. This is burning. I'm giving you the wrong instructions. What do I know? Okay, it's the opposite of that. Forget it. It was actually a piece of paper on a wire. You would take a coat hanger, and I can't believe I did that. And you would make a shape of paper, and then you would hold that in front of the light coming out of the enlarger onto the subject, and that would lighten it, meaning you would give that area less exposure of the paper than you would others. So if you wanted to lighten the face, called dodging, of somebody on a photo, you'd take that and you get your proper exposure for the overall scene, but then you dodge that person maybe 20, 10 seconds, whatever, less, so that the face would get less light than the rest of the image. And you could move it up and down, and that would kind of give you a feathering effect around the face. You do the same thing nowadays with Lightroom or Affinity Photo or some other program. It's still called dodging and burning if you're doing the opposite. But that's where you're darkening or lightening. Dodging will be lightening, but the burning would be obviously darkening. So anyway, duh. Sorry, Tamara, she didn't understand. I think it's kind of confusing. I got it. I have to demonstrate it maybe for you guys sometime. Okay. All right, here we go. A couple more. It's fun. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I am. Okay. So the next one is, which shutter speed lets in more light? 1/1000, A, B, 100, C, 1/500, D, 1/10. So which shutter speed would let in more light than the other three? All right, let's you guys see what you think of that. I told you they're going to get a little easier. The rest of them are kind of like this. They're not going to be too difficult. All right, so which shutter speed lets in more light? Okay, D. Tamara says D. Good answer. And I know this is a tough one for you, James. You probably can't get I'm just pulling his leg. James is an excellent photographer. Very much in touch with his photography and his subjects, which is why I like working with him, because he's very much on the art side. Of course, he comes out of being an art teacher or an art therapist, and so that's probably why. Okay. All right. So the correct answer is D. You're right. So the slower the shutter speed, the more light it's going to let in, obviously, more ambient light. And that's going to give you a brighter exposure. Okay. All right. Let's do I think I got just two, maybe a few more. How many more? Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 more. 10 of them, I said. Okay. Here's the next one. Which setting creates motion blur or blurred motion? A, increase the f-stop. B, increase the ISO. C, lower the shutter speed. D, shooting on manual. Which setting creates blurred motion? A, increase the f-stop. B, increase the ISO. C, lower the shutter speed. D, shooting on manual. Okay, Sue Ann says D. All right, what else? Anyone else? Oh, no, she says C now. Okay. All right. I'm trying to tell when these are coming in here. All right. Anybody else? 20. So, which setting creates motion blur? A, B, C, or D? James says C. Sue Ann says C. Anybody else? All right. And the correct answer is C. Lower the shutter speed, obviously. I say obviously. It's not so obvious to some people, but the slower the shutter speed, the subject moving in front of you of the frame, the camera is going to create blur. Now, this is actually something you use to your advantage. It can also be an advantage and a disadvantage. Let's look at the disadvantage first of all. A lot of times when people say my pictures aren't sharp, it's typically because of they're shooting at too slow of a shutter speed to be able to hand hold the picture or the camera. So here's the rule of thumb. Rule of thumb is you want to be shooting at least or double the focal length of the lens. Now this is left brain, remember? So try and bear with me. Here's what we're talking about here. If you have a 50 millimeter lens, fixed f50 millimeter lens, and you're hand holding the shot, you want to be shooting at least 1/25th of a second. You can do, sometimes you can get away with it at 60th of a second because it's such a small lens, it's not very heavy. But generally double the shutter speed. So you want, if it's a 50 millimeter lens, if If it's a 50 millimeter lens and you can shoot at 1/25th of a second, you're going to get a nice sharp picture. If you're shooting it at a 200 millimeter lens, then you need to be shooting at least at 400th of a second or 6/40th of a second handheld, because what happens is that lens, any movement in that lens is going to show up as motion blur. And so if you can't shoot on a tripod or monopod, or you can't brace yourself against something, and you want to at least be double the shutter speed to get a nice sharp picture handheld. So that's the deal on that. So, okay. All right, let's see here. We got a couple more. This is good. You guys are good. Doing good here. All right, so the next one is to correct a dark or underexposed image on your camera, you can either lower the shutter speed, B, increase the ISO, C, lower the f-stop, or D, any of the above. So to correct a dark or underexposed image on your camera, and again, this is looking not in post-processing, we're looking at live or while you're shooting. You can lower the shutter speed. You can increase the ISO. You could lower the f-stop, or you could do any of the above. Which one do you guys think that is? Doom, 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 doom. Come on, I know these are not that hard. You guys got to be able to get a couple of these. One thing about, so I don't know for the delay. Okay, so you guys didn't answer this one. All right. So to correct a dark underexposed image on your camera, lower the shutter speed, B, increase the ISO, lower the f-stop, or any of the above. And the answer is any of the above. So if you lower the shutter speed, you're going to get more ambient light in. If you increase the ISO, you're going to get, the sensor's going to be more sensitive, so therefore that would raise the exposure. If you lower the f-stop, meaning use a wider opening, somewhere 2.8, f1.8, whatever, then that's going to do it as well. So any of the three would work. In fact, those are the only three things you can change on a camera. I don't care what camera it is. You can only change the shutter speed, the ISO, or the f-stop on any camera, whether it's a $50,000 Hasselblad or whether it is a $200 Nikon D3000 or something, whatever. So anyway, all right, let's do another one. I think we got, let's see what, okay. Which f-stop gives a greater depth of field? A 2.8, B, f14, C, f1.8, D, f8. Which f-stop on a lens gives you the greater depth of field? 2.8, f14, f1.8, f8. It's a little bit of a trick question, you guys, maybe. All right. And your time is up, I think. Close. Got a little bit of a lag here. 5 seconds. And okay. All right. So James says B. Allie says B. Anybody else want to take a guess? Come on, guys. You can do it. I know you can. You're smart. All right. And the answer is B. Good going. I know you guys knew that. It's a simple question. I got to have something for everybody, right? You know, I don't want to make this too hard and everybody gets discouraged. All right. Is that it? I thought I had one more. Where is the other one? You know what? It's not. Oh, here it is. Okay. This is kind of an interesting one. You guys may like this one. All right. You ready? So, which photographer shot the most popular Nat Geo cover? And this is a photo that was taken. Annie Leibovitz, Joe McNally, Steve McCurry, Richard Avedon. You guys may not know this, okay? Because I don't know if you don't follow photographers or anything like that, or if you're not having shooting that long, you may not know this. But So which photographer? I happen to know what camera the person shot this with, and so which photographer shot the most popular Nat Geo cover? Annie Leibovitz, Joe McNally, Steve McCurry, Richard Avedon. Okay. I assume, James, your what was about the previous question, not about this one. I don't know. Maybe it is. All right. What do you guys think? Any guesses? You can guess. I mean, you got 4 choices there, right? You got to be able to find somebody. I should probably give you a hint who it's not. You guys can narrow it down from there. And someone good, Sue Ann says. Yes, you're right. Someone definitely very good. And well known. You don't hear too much about him as much anymore for some reason. No, any guesses? Anyone want to guess here? Again, I don't know if there's a delay. That's a guess. Okay, that's true. All right, I'll give you the answer. The answer is Steve McCurry. Steve McCurry shot this picture in I think it was 86, if I'm not mistaken. He shot it with a Nikon, like a Nichromat or something. Nikon. It wasn't even a fancy Nikon. And I think he shot it with I forgot what Nikon lens. Again, a mediocre lens. Wasn't that fantastic, not expensive or anything like that. And it was all manual, of course, on his camera and everything. And, it just was a picture that really resonated with people. And it became the most popular Nat Geo cover ever. And I think part of it is the woman's eyes are just stunning, And, of course, what's also interesting is if you go back to, what I keep harping about here, if you go back to this right here and you look at the item of the color as one of the 7 elements in art, and also the space, I think that's one of the things that makes this such a stunning picture. The color, of course, the contrast between the burgundy of her clothing and the green of the background are almost opposites on the color wheel, which really, and then her eyes, of course, add to that. And the lines, the composition, it's very simple portraiture. Okay, I'm sure it's available light, and not much to it. But boy, the emotion and the look, there's so much there behind the photo. And again, I don't mean to keep going, dwelling on this, but that's what makes the image, right? It doesn't matter what mode it was shot on, even though it was a manual film camera. The point was, it's that emotion that you get, that you feel, that sense of emotion that you look at, and that's what draws you to the image. It's not anything else. It's not the technical. It's not the exposure. It's not the mode they were shot on. It's not the fancy camera. It's not having 10,000 focus points. It's the expression from the woman's face. So anyway, all right. So listen, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I had some fun with it. And if you are, if you'd like me to continue to do this, I'd like to expand on it. Actually, I think we could have a lot more fun. I was working on some software tonight, trying to get this working, but I was afraid it wasn't too stable, where you actually can click on and leave and it will rank you and then give you a high score and some things like that. So we could have a little more fun with it. And I think we could even, if you wanted, we could even do some prizes or something like that later on. But I'm thinking about maybe trying to do this once a month. So we have on first Friday of the month, we have photo reviews. Maybe we'll do this the second Friday of the month. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. And again, don't forget, if you are on social media, follow us on social media and have a lot of fun there. And also keeping a lot of stuff, reviews and things going on. And if you want to submit some of your own work for photo reviews the first Friday of the month, you can get that in anytime. And if anyway, just love to have you join us. So, hey, listen, enjoyed you guys having here. Thanks. I hope this was helpful, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week, Friday, 5 p.m. Again, same thing, Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you guys.